Ma'am, stop right there. Don't move.
Excuse me? This is my house. Who are you?
Immigration and Customs Enforcement. We need you to come with us for questioning.
I'm Congresswoman Elaine Harris. You're in my driveway. Do you have a warrant?
We don't need one. Turn around, hands behind your back.
She didn't move. That was 8:45 on a Tuesday morning. By 9:23, everything changed. Not for her, for them. Within 98 minutes, 4 federal agents would lose their careers, their badges, and their freedom, all because of what happened next in this driveway. And the only reason you're hearing this story right now is because someone was watching. If this is your first time here, this channel covers stories like this. Stories that almost never get told. Subscribe so you don't miss what comes next. Because what happened after that moment right there, no one saw it coming. But the cameras did. They always were. Sandra Mae Watkins had been a civil rights attorney for 24 years. Not the kind who shows up for press conferences. The kind who wins. In federal court, her record spoke for itself. 31 wins out of 34 cases. 3 of those wins created legal precedents that are still cited today. She sat on the board of the ACLU Maryland chapter. Federal prosecutors knew her name before she walked into the room. This was not a woman who didn't know the law. That Tuesday morning in March, she woke up at 6:15. Routine, coffee, files for the day. Her 16-year-old niece was still asleep upstairs, the girl she'd been raising since she was 12. The house sat in a quiet suburban neighborhood in Maryland. Nothing unusual about it. Except for one thing, Sandra had installed security cameras 2 years prior. 4 exterior cameras, 1 on the front porch, 2 covering the driveway. All recording in 4K, all uploading to cloud storage every 30 seconds. Every single second of that driveway was being captured. At 8:42 a.m. a black SUV with government plates turned onto her street. Inside were 4 ICE agents. The lead agent was Robert Castellano, 14 years with the agency, 9 complaints filed against him in 5 years, 0 consequences. He had an address, he had a tip, and he had absolutely no warrant. The cameras were already recording. They had been the whole time. The first one out was Margaret Liu, 68 years old, retired teacher. She'd lived next door for 22 years. She knew Sandra, she knew the neighborhood, and she knew something was wrong the second she looked out her kitchen window. Her phone was already in her hand when she stepped onto her porch. "What are you doing?" Margaret called out. Her voice carried across the quiet street. "That's Sandra Watkins. Leave her alone." Castellano turned briefly. "Ma'am, step back. This is federal business." Margaret didn't step back. She kept filming. 30 seconds later, Dennis Hargrove appeared on his porch across the street. Dennis was 45, off-duty police officer. He'd been a cop for 19 years. He knew procedure. He knew what a lawful arrest looked like. And what he was watching in Sandra's driveway was not one. He pulled out his phone without a word. Now there were 2 phones recording from 2 separate angles. 2 independent witnesses. 2 people whose testimony would carry weight in any courtroom in the country. Sandra saw them. She didn't react. She stayed focused on Castellano. "You still haven't shown me a warrant," she said. Castellano's posture shifted. He was being watched now by neighbors, by cameras, by a woman who knew the law better than he did. But he didn't back down. He doubled down. "We have administrative authority that supersedes standard warrant requirements," he repeated. "Federal immigration law gives us the power to question and detain individuals suspected of harboring undocumented persons without prior judicial authorization." He said it with confidence. It sounded official. It was completely fabricated. Sandra didn't blink. "Name the statute," she said. Castellano said nothing. "Name the specific section of federal immigration law you're referencing," Sandra repeated. "Because in 24 years of practicing civil rights law, I have never seen the provision you just described. It doesn't exist." The driveway went quiet. Margaret's phone was still rolling. Dennis hadn't lowered his. The porch camera captured Sandra's face, calm, steady, precise, and Castellano's jaw-tight eyes fixed, no answer coming. right here, right at this moment. A federal agent had just fabricated a legal justification for an arrest out loud in front of multiple witnesses, multiple cameras, and a woman with 31 federal court victories who had already identified the lie before he finished saying it. Think about that for a second. An armed federal agent standing on a woman's own property, making up law to justify why he was there. And the only thing standing between him and that lie being ignored forever was a 68-year-old retired teacher with her phone out and an off-duty cop who already knew what he was seeing was wrong because it was wrong. And everyone on that driveway knew that, everyone except Castellano. And the cameras had every second of it. Castellano grabbed her arm. Sandra pulled back. Firm, not violent. She was simply removing his hand from her body, a hand that had no legal right to be there. One single motion. That was all. Bennett came in from the left. Fast, his hand locked around her other arm before she could react. The briefcase hit the ground, case files, weeks of work documents. She had spent hours organizing for an active case, scattered across the porch concrete in the cold March air. Sandra didn't scream. She didn't struggle. "Get your hands off me," she said. Her voice didn't shake. It cut through the quiet street like a blade. "This is assault. You have no legal authority to touch me." Castellano wasn't listening anymore. He twisted her arm behind her back. The angle was wrong, too high, too aggressive. Sandra's body jerked forward. A sharp sound left her mouth. Not a scream, a gasp. The sound a person makes when something is being done to their body that shouldn't be happening. The porch camera caught every frame of it. Margaret Liu was 30 feet away on her own porch. Phone up, hand steady. She had known Sandra Watkins for over a decade, had seen her come and go from this house hundreds of times, had waved to her in the morning, had borrowed sugar from her kitchen. And now she was watching that same woman get her arms forced behind her back by a man with a badge and no warrant. Margaret didn't lower the phone. Not once. Dennis Hargrove stood across the street. 19 years as a police officer. He knew what a lawful detention looked like. He knew what probable cause looked like. He knew what proper procedure looked like. This was none of those things. His phone stayed up. His expression stayed neutral. But his eyes tracked every single movement Castellano made the way a cop watches another cop who is about to destroy his own career. The handcuffs closed. Click. The sound carried across the street, across the driveways, into the microphones of every camera that was pointed at that moment. Sandra's wrists were locked behind her back. She stood there, navy suit heels on the concrete papers at her feet, and for the first time since she stepped outside, she said nothing. Not because she had nothing to say, because she was waiting. They started moving her toward the SUV. Bennett walked on her left. Castellano on her right, grip still tight on her arm. The driveway camera tracked the movement, every step, every angle, every detail of the way they were handling her, the way her body was being steered, the way her feet moved across the concrete. Bennett opened the back door of the SUV. They pushed her inside. Her head nearly hit the door frame. She ducked fast, instinctive, but the roughness of the movement was visible from 3 separate camera angles. Margaret saw it. Dennis saw it. The camera saw it. And then 1 second before they closed the door, Sandra spoke. Not to Castellano, not to Bennett, not to any of them. To the cameras. "My name is Sandra Mae Watkins. I am a licensed civil rights attorney in the state of Maryland. I am being illegally detained by ICE agents who have no warrant, no probable cause, and no legal authorization for this arrest. The date is Tuesday. The time is approximately 8:58 a.m. I am being removed from my home against my will. I have committed no crime." Every word landed clean. Every word was captured. Castellano slammed the door shut. The SUV reversed out of the driveway. License plate visible. Timestamp visible. Everything visible. It pulled off the street at 9:01 a.m. The house went quiet. Upstairs in a bedroom at the back of the house, Sandra's 16-year-old niece was still asleep. The girl Sandra had been raising since she was 12. The girl she had built every case, fought every fight, stayed up every late night for. The girl who would wake up in an empty house and not understand why until someone told her what happened in the driveway that morning. Sandra didn't think about that right then. She couldn't, but she had thought about it before. Every time she walked into a courtroom, every time she picked up a case no one else would touch, every time she told someone the law is supposed to protect you. Margaret was already dialing 911. Dennis was already texting Sandra's attorney, a number he had saved from years of community meetings, from nights Sandra had stood in front of crowds and explained why constitutional rights mattered to people like them. Within minutes, 3 more neighbors had come outside. Phones out, recording from different angles, uploading in real time. 20 minutes. That's how long it took. 20 minutes from the moment the SUV left that driveway to the moment local news crews were already making calls. 20 minutes from Sandra's statement in the back of that vehicle to the footage being shared across every platform simultaneously. 20 minutes from a quiet Tuesday morning in a suburban Maryland neighborhood to a national story that every network in the country would be running before lunch. The images hit fast. A black woman in a professional suit handcuffed on her own porch, papers scattered at her feet, neighbors on their porches, phones raised, armed federal agents in tactical gear forcing her into an SUV with no warrant. It was everywhere before noon. And in an ICE field office in Arlington, 4 agents who had walked out that morning believing they were doing their jobs were about to find out what happens when the cameras are already on and they never even knew it. The interrogation room was small. Gray walls, 1 table, 2 chairs, a camera in the corner, but this one was controlled by ICE. They thought that mattered. It didn't. Sandra's phone was still in her jacket pocket. She had triggered the emergency recording function before they grabbed her on the porch. It had been recording the entire time. Every word, every second, on audio, uploading to her cloud automatically. Castellano sat across from her. Bennett stood behind him. Pritchard and Wu waited outside the door. Sandra, Castellano began. His tone was different now, slower, almost casual. We have information that you have been harboring undocumented individuals at your residence. We need to know who they are. Sandra looked at him. She said nothing for exactly 3 seconds. Then she spoke. I am invoking my 5th Amendment right to remain silent. I am invoking my 6th Amendment right to an attorney. I will not answer any questions without legal counsel present. That was it. No anger, no performance. Just the words placed on the record, clean and precise, the way she had done it dozens of times before in rooms exactly like this one. Castellano leaned forward. That's going to make this harder for you. Is it? Sandra asked. She didn't look away from him. Because from where I'm sitting, you've already committed multiple federal crimes. False arrest, kidnapping under color of law, deprivation of civil rights, assault. And that's just what happened in my driveway. Bennett slammed his hand on the table. Sandra didn't flinch. Show me your evidence, she said. Calm, steady. Show me what you actually have. Castellano opened the folder. 1 page, a single sheet of paper, an anonymous tip. No names, no dates, no specific allegations. Nothing that would constitute probable cause for a traffic stop, let alone the arrest of a licensed civil rights attorney in her own home. Sandra looked at it. She read it. Then she looked back at Castellano. That's what you use, she said. An anonymous tip with no details. That's what you brought to my door. The room was quiet. This was the moment the loop closed. From the very beginning, from the first second, Castellano stepped out of that SUV. The question had been hanging in the air. What did they have? What was their proof? What could possibly justify what they did that morning? This was the answer. Nothing. The door opened hard. Deputy Director Amanda Chen walked in. Two agents from a separate division followed her. Her face was white, not from surprise, from fury, the kind that comes from understanding exactly how badly something has gone wrong and exactly how many people are already watching it happen. Castellano, Bennett, out, now. They left without a word. The interrogation ended at 11:52 a.m. Sandra was released at 12:03 p.m., exactly 1 hour after she had been taken from her home. Her attorney was already there when they walked her out. Catherine Reed, 30 years in federal civil rights law. She had gotten the call while she was in another courthouse and had driven straight here without stopping. Sandra's chief of staff, Marcus Johnson, was there too, and a representative from the speaker's office. No one spoke much. There was nothing to say yet. The facts were already doing the talking. The FBI moved that same afternoon. Service weapons seized, badges pulled, credentials confiscated. By 5 p.m., all four agents were on administrative leave. By 6 p.m., a criminal investigation was officially open. The Justice Department didn't need time to decide. The evidence was already there. 4 security cameras, 3 neighbor phones, Sandra's emergency audio recording. Every word Castellano had spoken on that driveway, including the legal justification he had invented on the spot. The FBI didn't have to work for this one. The cameras had done it for them. The charges came down 6 weeks later. Deprivation of rights under color of law, a federal felony, up to 10 years in prison, conspiracy to violate civil rights, kidnapping, false imprisonment, assault. The trial was swift. The footage played in the courtroom, every angle, every second. The jury watched Castellano grab Sandra's arm. They heard her invoke her rights. They watched the handcuffs close. They saw the way Bennett pushed her into the SUV. They heard Sandra's statement, her name, the time, the facts recorded clean and clear in the back of a government vehicle. Then Castellano took the stand. His attorney tried to frame it as good faith, acting on a credible tip, following procedure, standard operation. The prosecutor didn't let it breathe. Agent Castellano, when Sandra Watkins told you she was a civil rights attorney, what did you think? I thought she was trying to use her position to avoid questioning. Did you verify her identity before proceeding with the arrest? No. Why not? I didn't think it mattered. The prosecutor paused. Let that sit. You didn't think it mattered that you might be arresting a licensed attorney. Castellano shifted in his seat. She looked like the other people we typically deal with. The courtroom went silent. No one moved. No one spoke. The prosecutor didn't need to say a word. She let the statement hang in the air, open, exposed, recorded the way Sandra's statement had hung in the air in the back of that SUV. Then the prosecutor turned to the jury. In your 14 years with ICE agent Castellano, how many white individuals have you arrested for harboring undocumented immigrants? I don't keep track of race. According to ICE's own records, the answer is 0. You have arrested 47 people on that charge. All 47 were people of color. All 47. Castellano had no answer. And somewhere in that courtroom, in the back rows where community members had come to watch Dennis Hargrove, was sitting. The same off-duty cop who had stood on his porch that Tuesday morning with his phone raised. The same man who had known from the first second what he was watching was wrong. He had seen it from the beginning. Now the entire country was seeing it too. The jury deliberated for 9 hours. When they came back, the verdict was unanimous. Guilty on all counts. The sentencing followed. Castellano, 5 years in federal prison. Bennett, 4 years. Pritchard, who had cooperated and testified against the others, 2 years. Wu, 3 years of probation. Barred from federal law enforcement for life. 5 years. For fabricating a legal justification, grabbing a woman on her own property, handcuffing her without cause, and admitting on the stand that he profiled her based on her skin color. Does that fit what he did? That's not for me to decide. but I want to hear what you think. Drop it in the comments. Because this wasn't just about one morning in one driveway. This was about what happens when someone with a badge decides the law doesn't apply to them, and whether the system actually has the ability to stop it. The cameras said yes, but the cameras were the only reason. The sentences began within weeks. Castellano was transferred to a federal facility in Pennsylvania, Bennett to one in Kentucky, Pritchard to a women's facility in West Virginia. They would each serve a minimum of 85% of their sentences before being eligible for release. Their careers were over. Not suspended, not reviewed, over. 14 years of Castellano's life in federal law enforcement gone. The pension he had been building for over a decade forfeited. The same went for Bennett, for Pritchard, for Wu. Everything they had worked toward, everything the badge was supposed to mean to them, erased in one morning. Wu completed his probation quietly. He works as a warehouse supervisor now. His law enforcement career ended before it ever really began. He was 26 years old when he stood in Sandra's driveway and did nothing to stop what was happening. He will not work in law enforcement again. The civil lawsuit came months later. Sandra sued the agents personally and ICE as an agency. The settlement was confidential. The exact number was never made public. But sources close to the case confirmed it was substantial. And every dollar of it went to organizations that provide legal defense for immigrants and families facing deportation. Not to Sandra, to them. ICE responded with new protocols, new training on lawful detention procedures, new oversight mechanisms, new accountability structures built into the system on paper. Whether those changes meant anything in practice, that remained to be seen, not a judgment, just a fact. Institutions change policy after incidents like this. Whether the culture underneath that policy actually shifts is a different question entirely. One that takes years to answer. The footage stayed online. It is still being watched. It is still being shared. It is still being used in training sessions across the country as an example of what happens when procedure is ignored, when authority becomes assumption, and when the belief that a badge places someone above the law meets the reality that cameras are everywhere. 98 minutes of footage, 4 cameras on one property, 3 phones from 3 separate neighbors, 1 emergency audio recording from inside Sandra's own jacket. That was all it took. Margaret Liu became something of a local figure after the case. She spoke at community meetings about the importance of witnessing, of recording, of not staying silent when you see something wrong happening in front of you. She still lives next door to Sandra. She still waves in the morning. Dennis Hargrove went back to his regular duties as a police officer. But the video he recorded that Tuesday morning, the one from his porch, the one that showed 4 armed federal agents detaining a woman with no warrant in broad daylight, that video became one of the most watched clips in the entire case. Because Dennis wasn't just a neighbor, he was a cop. And when a cop stands on his porch and films another agency violating someone's rights, that carries a weight that no amount of official statements can match. Sandra May Watkins still lives in that house. She still parks in that driveway. Still walks out her front door every morning the same way she did on that Tuesday in March. The cameras are still up, still recording, still uploading every 30 seconds to the cloud. Her niece is still growing up in that house, still sleeping upstairs on quiet mornings, still learning every single day what it means to live in a country where the law is supposed to protect you. Sandra didn't fight that morning for herself. She didn't need to say it. Anyone who watched the footage understood it without a single word being spoken. Every federal agent in this state knows her name now. Not because she lost, because she won. And because the way she won made it impossible for anyone in law enforcement to pretend that accountability doesn't exist. But here's the thing that keeps this story from being a simple ending. Sandra had cameras. Sandra had neighbors who filmed. Sandra had 24 years of legal knowledge in a phone with emergency recording capability and connections to attorneys who could move within hours. Sandra had every possible tool that exists to fight back. Most people don't. Most people who get detained without cause don't have security cameras backed up to the cloud. They don't have off-duty police officers living across the street. They don't have 31 federal court victories and a name that prosecutors already know. They have nothing, and their stories don't end up online. They don't go viral. They don't result in federal investigations or courtroom verdicts or national news coverage. They just end, quietly, without footage, without witnesses, without anyone ever knowing it happened. That's the next story, and it's coming. If this case mattered to you, if what happened in that driveway made you feel something you couldn't ignore, then share this. Subscribe. And leave a comment with one word. Do you believe this system actually works? Or did it only work this time because Sandra had the resources to make it work? That's the real question. The cameras can't answer it. Only we can.